Hey everyone, welcome to the question and answer session. It's ground floor, it's May Camp. I hope you're having a great weekend. My name is Nick Taylor. I am the youth and children's worker at Chanctonbury Church. And it is my pleasure to be facilitating this time with two guys who are awesome. The first up is Lloyd, who is a youth leader at Rudrick. Lloyd, say hi.
Hi.
And then we've also got the legend that is Holly Butler, who is a family worker at Wadhurst as well.
Hello. Hi to everyone in
Excellent.
Wadhurst. Greetings to family and friends.
Excellent. The format for this morning or for this afternoon is that in a minute I'm going to hand over to Lloyd, who's going to talk to us about who Jesus is and what it says in the Bible, what did he say about himself, and also what people think about him now and what some of your friends and family might say who Jesus is. So looking forward to that. And then after that, Holly is going to give a personal testimony. Stories are brilliant, and I'm really looking forward to hearing that. It's going to be powerful. And then after that, we are going to take your questions. So the way you can send questions into us is either by writing them in the YouTube text, or you can send an anonymized text message. If you're a bit worried about your question, you don't want your name to pop up next to it, that's fine. You can send a text and the number is on screen there underneath our faces. So before we start, I want to do two things. The first one is we are going to just play a little game, and that is I've got 3 facts, one from Lloyd, one from me, and one from Holly. I'm going to read them out, and then your task over the next 50 minutes, as well as engaging with everything that's going on here, is to have a think about which fact belongs to which person. So are you ready? Fact number 1. This person used to compete for their country at judo. Okay, fact number 2. This person was in a hardcore punk band at university. And fact number 3, this person has had the Princess of Romania stay at their house. Very regal and royal. So they're the 3 facts. Have a think. Which one do you think belongs to which person? And let us know in the comments on YouTube, and we'll let you know at the end. So before I hand over to Lloyd, let's just pray and invite God here. Father, I thank you for all the amazing things that are happening over this weekend with May Camp. It's so clear that you're here, you're speaking to us, you're present, you're alive, and you love us. And I pray that for the next 50 minutes, as we speak and as we interact with those who are online, that there will be a real sense of your spirit. Would your Holy Spirit stir up in us the right words to say? And would you speak to us all, those who are speaking, those who are listening, and would people who are engaged in this dialogue be changed, not from what we say, but from encountering you. Thank you that you love us so much. Amen.
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 Enough of me. Lloyd, over to you. Take it away, brother.
Yeah, hey guys, I'm Lloyd. Those of you that know me know I'm an American. I've been living in Rudrick for 12 years, doing youth and community work in Rudrick, and love being here. So hello. Normally we'd be experiencing about now the great hospitality of the Danehill marquee. And you know, it's a shame that we can't be together physically this year, but it's wonderful to be together in an online format. So the question is, who is Jesus? Who is Jesus, and how can we go about answering that question? Well, there's a story in the Bible. Yeah, okay, I'm a Christian youth worker. I'm going to talk about the Bible a little bit, but there's a story in the Bible. If you want to follow along, it's found in Matthew's Gospel, chapter 16. If you want to look it up later or now, you can do that. Jesus is having a conversation with some of his followers. and then we know they're sometimes called disciples. And he says to them, who do people say that I am? In other words, he's kind of getting at what are the crowds thinking about me? What are they saying about me? Now, bear in mind at this point in time that these 12 men, apostles or disciples, have been following Jesus for a year or two, but they probably still don't fully understand or appreciate what Jesus is all about. And so they give him a range of answers. Says, who do people say I am? And they give a range of answers that mostly has to do with religious leaders, prophets from the old days. You know, some say you're Jeremiah, some say you're Elijah. And then Jesus makes it a lot more pointed. He turns to them individually and says, okay, fine. Who do you say that I am? Enough about what other people think. What do you think? Now, I think that's a good way to frame our discussion today. What would some of your friends say about Jesus if you asked them, what do you think about Jesus Christ? What do you think people say? Some might say he's a good teacher. Some might say he was a prophet. Some might say, oh, I just think he was a lunatic, you know. Others might say, you know, I'm not really even sure Jesus existed. So I want to look at a couple of these answers and see what we think about this. The first one is a common one, a good one, isn't it? Jesus was a good moral teacher. And I say most of us would probably agree with that, wouldn't they? We would agree that his teaching was pretty important, that it contains some really good advice. Maybe sometimes advice that's really hard to follow, but things like this: love your neighbor as yourself. That's really good advice, isn't it? Treat people how you want to be treated. Forgive people when they do you wrong. Gosh, this is great. If we all did this, the world would be a different place, wouldn't it? Help people who need it, even if you're not sure if they deserve it. It's like, wow, I get that. Man, that would change so much in our communities and neighborhoods, wouldn't it? And here's a great one too. Most of us might know the phrase: if someone slaps you on one cheek, turn the other cheek. You probably were able to fill that in without me saying it. All this great moral teaching. And probably most of us agree that that's good stuff, even if we find it hard to follow. I mean, I even find it hard sometimes to forgive someone who's done me wrong. But even if I find it difficult, I'd still say it's really good advice. But we come to a problem, because even though Jesus said all this great stuff, this great moral teaching, he also said stuff like he was the Son of God. He also claimed he was a Messiah, and he had a kingdom that was not of this world. One time he said something really crazy. Some religious leaders were talking to him, right? And he says, you know, Abraham, who lived 2,000 years ago, before Abraham was born, I was already alive. And people got really mad at him because he's saying he's thousands of years old, probably eternal, which means basically he's equal to God. And that really made a lot of people angry. And you could see why. And then he said something like this. He said he'd be killed, and 3 days later he would rise again. Well, why, Lloyd, are you telling us all this? Why is this a problem? Well, because if those things about him aren't true, that he's not the Son of God, that he's not the Messiah, that he's not eternal, and so forth, then can he really be a good teacher? So I kind of am like, yeah, you know, he was a good moral teacher, but he said he was the Son of God. So either that has to also be true, or maybe he wasn't so good a great moral teacher. Hang with me for just a moment, and I'll come back to that. Sometimes we hear people say that he's a prophet. This is an interesting one too, because even my Muslim friends would agree that Jesus is a prophet. They wouldn't say he's the Son of God, but they would agree that he's also a prophet. And certainly he was a prophet. Prophet, you know, being a religious leader, someone who speaks on behalf of God, someone who tells us good things that we ought to know and follow. But would someone who's a prophet normally call themselves God? No, not really. Normally, those kinds of prophets we call dangerous cult leaders. You know, if someone were to come out today and say, I'm a prophet and I'm equal to God, everyone should come and follow me, we'd be like calling the authorities, because that would be kind of crazy. Here's another one that sometimes people think today. there are people more and increasingly more, and this was a bizarre one to me, but there are people who argue now that there's a historical case that Jesus never existed. And maybe you've heard this, maybe you've heard it from some of the big famous atheists who would claim, Jesus probably didn't even exist. And this one's really fascinating because it's just completely categorically untrue. No serious historian, actual like Middle Eastern historian, would say that Jesus did not exist. Now, you can argue whether or not you believe the things that he said, but it's verifiably true that a man called Jesus was born in Galilee somewhere around 2 BC, that his earthly father was a carpenter, that he experienced a mystical baptism by a man called John the Baptist, who was later, and this man was later executed by King Herod. History attests to these things. History tells us that Jesus Christ was a reformer in the Jewish religion, that he preached about the kingdom of God and instituted change in the religious practices at the time. History tells us that this man called Jesus was followed as a wise man and teacher, that he had people who followed him. In fact, that he had 12 disciples who followed him closely. And then it gets even more interesting. History will tell us that this man was crucified by the Roman Empire in either 29 AD or 33 AD. And there's a reason for these two specific dates. And this has to do with something that happened on the day that he died. Now, if you know this story at all, if you're familiar with the story, you'll know something really strange happened while Jesus was hanging on the cross. Anybody remember what happened to the sky? So in the middle of the afternoon, it went dark. Now, you might think that's really bizarre, but there are actually scientific reasons why the sky might turn dark in the middle of the day. And what would that be? If you said an eclipse, you're right. And history actually tells us that in the year 29 AD and in the year 33 AD, a solar eclipse happened that could have explained why the sky went dark while Jesus was hanging on the cross. Now, of course, 33 AD aligns a little bit more closely from what we know about Jesus' life and his teaching and ministry. And so that is definitely a possible link up there with the historical account of who Jesus was, as well as the biblical one. It's also believed in history that there were people who believed Jesus could perform miracles. Now, I'm not saying to you yet that you should believe that. I'm only saying it that history attests to the fact that the people who followed Jesus believed he could perform miracles, which is pretty interesting if you think about it. Lastly, while we know that the man called Jesus was crucified, it is also believed by those who followed him the closest that he rose from the dead. Now, this sounds entirely crazy. No one that you or I know has ever died and come back to life. But here's the thing about it. The people who followed Jesus the closest believed that's exactly what happened. And they believed it so strongly that they were willing to die for those beliefs. Now, who do you know is willing to die for a complete lie? Probably none of us. But they will die for something they believe strongly. You know, we know of people who've gone to war because they believed in the cause that they were fighting for. They were willing to sacrifice their lives so that others could be free. And this is kind of more in that category. This is people who believed in something so strongly that they were willing to die for it. Now, we've talked about Jesus as a good moral teacher, as a prophet, as someone who possibly didn't exist. And I think we've kind of ruled that one out, at least. Another possibility is that he was just crazy. And I'll be honest with you, I have a little bit of sympathy for this view, because if someone like Jesus came around and said the kind of things that Jesus said, believed he could perform miracles, said he was going to die and come back from the dead, we'd probably think he was crazy. And so I have a little bit of sympathy for that. There's one more that I'd like to discuss, and that is some people who just believe, yeah, he probably exists and maybe he was a good guy and all that, but I'm just not interested. He's all right, but that's nothing to do with me. And that's the one I just cannot accept. I cannot understand that at all. If the resurrection didn't happen, fine. He's got nothing to do with me, and Jesus changes nothing. However, and this is a huge however, if Jesus really did exist, and he really did do and say the things that he said and did, and the resurrection is really true, then it changes everything, which means that the one thing that Jesus cannot be is just of no importance. He's either of ultimate importance or no importance at all, but he can't be just kind of in the middle. Yeah, he's all right. Do you know what I mean? And the final option is maybe he really is the Son of God. So I leave you with the question that Jesus asked his disciples. We've been talking about what other people think about Jesus, who they see Jesus is. Who do you say that Jesus is? Is he crazy? Is he a good teacher, a prophet and nothing more? Is he a dangerous cult leader? Or is it possible that just maybe he's the Son of God and the Messiah, which would make him the Savior of the whole world? Over to you. What do you think, guys?
Love that, Lloyd. Brilliant. And it's a view, all of those views, I've heard in the past from various people. And I agree with you. The idea that he is just, yeah, he probably was around, probably was a good guy, maybe died, but doesn't affect me now. I just need to be a good moral person. I can't get my head around that either. It's weird, isn't it? And some of the questions that I've had from friends is, why can't I just be good? And then you kind of think about, well, who decides what's good in life? Who sets that standard? And we believe, don't we, that it was Jesus that set that standard of what is good. Otherwise, it's all left to us. And as we know from recent events, humans, we don't make a very good. We're not very good at kind of making decisions and setting standards for ourselves. We tend to cause a bit of mess, don't we? So I love that. And guys, if you've got any thoughts on anything that Lloyd said, maybe some views that you agree with Lloyd, maybe you got some questions on what he said, maybe there's some views there that some people in your family or your friends have shared, and you just want to get some clarification on that, then please, we'd love to hear from you. Put it in the YouTube text, or send us a text to the phone number on the screen. Brilliant. Holly, we're going to pass over to Holly now, and she's going to share a bit of her story.
Thank you very much. Well, that was a really good place to end, because actually I was a person that really didn't acknowledge Jesus and just didn't see any relevance in my life before I was a Christian. And so I'm just going to tell you a bit about my story, and it's got four main points that were important to me becoming Christian. And the first one is friends. The next one is finding a church. The next one, the third, is a decision. And the last one was a small group. So I'm going to talk about those. So I have been really blessed with a loving family and a wonderful childhood, which I am so grateful for. And so when I first heard about the need for Jesus in my life to fix my brokenness, that really just didn't make sense to me, because I didn't feel broken. And I know that's not the case for everyone, but this is my story. And so in my early 20s, I met some new friends who were all South African. And when I look back on it, it was a bit like a South African invasion of my life. And I met them through working in hospitals. And there was just something different about them. We did similar things, like we all went out to parties, we told jokes, we worked hard at our jobs and cared about our jobs and helping people. But they were miles from home, miles from their families and their parents. And yet they went to church, as they wanted to go to church. When we had meals together, because having meals together was really important to them. And so we would pray together before every meal and hold hands. And for young people that don't know each other very well, I was used to, like, you don't hold hands with people. But they always did that. They read the Bible, which I thought was amazing. And yeah, they wanted to do these things, and they didn't feel compelled to tell me all about their faith and why they did these things. But I was led to question because it intrigued me. And when I questioned, they gave me some really good answers, because I didn't feel that I had anything to say sorry to God for. I felt like I was a good person. So when I said, what do I need to do to be a Christian? Um, my friends helped me understand, and a friend that later became my husband, in particular, helped me to understand that that was just it. I hadn't done anything to get to know my Creator. And it was like being given an amazing gift and never saying thank you to the person that gave it to you or finding out exactly how it worked. And I think up until this point, I'd never really considered that it was possible to get to know the creator. And yeah, but I could see from the way my new friends lived their lives that it was possible. And they made that really clear. And they were really good fun to be around. It brought something to their lives. They really enjoyed life. So sometime later, me and Marina's got married. That's my South African husband now. And I thought, if I love him, and being a Christian is really important to him, then we should find a church that it's important to us. So we tried out some different churches and we were a bit embarrassed and a bit nervous. So we'd look up a church online, then we'd go in as late as possible, sneak in the back, sit down, like so no one could see us, and then listen to the message, and then try and get out as quick as possible before anyone had a chance to talk to us. And so we did this for a little bit. And at the same time, my sister-in-law gave me a Christian music CD. So first experience of Christian music, and it was really uplifting. There was this amazing energy to it, but it was also relaxing. I'd never heard anything like it, and it really led me to look into Christian music. And I was really amazed by these people that were writing these lyrics that seemed to speak to me. It was so current. They spoke about real things. And so the next time we checked out a church, it was a little church in Bexley Heath, that was in the road that we lived in. And it was a little church. So there wasn't much place to hide. And we turned up, and like normally when we went to a church, I found it really difficult to feel comfortable. Like I didn't know the songs. But tune after tune at this little church were all from the CD that my sister-in-law had given to me. And I found that I could relax. I could enjoy the music because I knew the words. I could join in, and it really felt like God was saying, "This is where I want you. I want you to feel at home, and this is where you're going to grow. This is where I want you to be." And at that church, we found people of all ages, all backgrounds and cultures, living life together, mourning together, laughing together, serving each other and their community. And at coffee time, they would say things like, "What's God doing for you this week?" And I was like, "Oh, I never considered that He was doing stuff." But I needed to be asked those questions, and it helped me to look out for God in my life. And it was really interesting to hear their responses. So sometimes that God was, they just knew He was with them. It wasn't always like amazing miracles, but they felt that He was there. And they brought Him into every decision that they made. So that was an amazing part. But we were attending another church sometime later. And after all this had happened, I felt like I needed to make a decision, sort of publicly, to say that, yeah, I believe this. I want to stand up and be counted as a Christian. And so every service at this other church I went to, there was an altar call. And so that would be after the message, the preacher might say, if you want to follow Jesus today, make it today. Come up the front, we'll pray for you and we'll help you get started. So that week I thought, when the altar call comes, I want to do that. But I had an ear infection all week and I could hardly hear anything. And I just thought, I don't even know if I feel well enough to go to church. But on that Sunday morning, I thought, I'm just going to ask God if I should do this. Would you just help me to hear when I'm at church? Open my ears. And I sort of forgot about my prayer, went to church. And it wasn't until the sermon, the message, that was all about someone being healed from deafness, that I suddenly remembered my prayer and realized that, oh yeah, I'm hearing everything clearly. And so when the altar call came, I ran up the front. I was like, nothing is stopping me. And it was such an amazing time to just plant my flag and say, yep, I want to make this decision publicly. And so after that, I hadn't been a Christian for long. And I thought, what if when things get tough, or if things are going good, I just forget all about God again and just, go off on my own. And I knew that I needed more than just a Sunday to get me through. I needed a smaller group of people to help me learn about the Bible and just help me be a Christian. And so I'd been reading the Bible on my own for a bit up until this time. I've been reading a version called The Message that is really easy to understand. Someone had recommended it to me because it had an introduction before every chapter, and it was really helpful. And so I asked at the church that I was going to in Wadhurst then, can I join a Bible study group? I could only do a Monday. They said, that's okay. There's a Monday group. That's brilliant. And so I went to this group for the first time. And I was really excited that I was going to do some Bible study. And I had no idea what they were studying. I didn't really know anyone really well, but they were expecting me. And it was really relaxed. There was plenty of chat and cake. And I thought, it's going to be ages before I can get involved in any discussion on the Bible. I'd hardly read any of it, let alone understand it. And to my amazement, when the leader of the group said, right, this is what we're studying, open up your Bibles, it was the exact place that I was reading. And not only that, I was just slightly ahead. The night before, I'd read the passage that they were reading. And I was just like, I can be part of this conversation. And they were blown away as well by, I just read that. And again, I just felt God was saying, I want you to feel comfortable. I'm doing everything I can to help you to grow. And these are the people that I want you to be around that are going to help you to grow. And I soon discovered, I discovered a while back in my journey that I did do things wrong, and I did have things that I needed to say sorry to God for, and that continues to be the case for all of us. And I realized at being part of this small group that we're all on a different journey with God, and He has made us all unique, and He makes us to communicate with Him in a way that complements how He has made us. And in this group, we were serving each other, serving the community, again, doing life together, laughing together, crying together, problem solving our lives together, and studying God's word. So for me, friends telling me about Jesus was really important. Finding a church, making a decision, and then being part of a small group, and all of those things continue to be really important in being a Christian to me. Thanks for listening.
Holly, that's awesome.
Fantastic. Yeah.
Absolutely love it. And I love how I think if you ask so many people, how they got to know Jesus, it would be through friends. And there's so many, I think a lot of misunderstanding out there is that you have to kind of wait for a vicar or someone standing at the front to tell you and introduce you to Jesus. But, I think our stories, and especially yours there, Holly, just shows something completely different. And the natural kind of conversation with friends, and often it's how we are rather than what we say that can kind of point people towards Jesus as well, isn't it? So I love that. Yeah. And it's a great, what you're saying is a great shout out for small groups as well. And I don't know, I'm a big fan of small groups. Some people might find it a bit of a struggle when you're kind of, the spotlights, there's fewer people to share the spotlight with, and you might feel a bit more kind of, what can I say? What can I bring? But I would just encourage people to find a group of people who they feel safe talking with, and asking questions to, where you can do that, and where you can grow in your faith through like-minded people, and even people who aren't like-minded, who what's that saying? Iron sharpens iron, and you kind of, sometimes your questions and your stories can be interpreted and picked apart in a different way that just helps you with your journey with God. So thanks for sharing, Holly. That was great. I love it.
You're welcome.
Guys, we're going to move in. Oh, go on.
Yeah, I was just going to say, should we look at some questions and see what's come in? Yeah,
absolutely. So we've got about just under 20 minutes to answer a few questions. We've had a couple come in while we've been online. And the first one here I think we should just talk about is, how do we know what is God and what is a coincidence? And I'll open it to Lloyd and Holly in a sec. I just think that actually some of what Holly shared there, you could when she went to church and heard those songs that are on her CD, and when she went to a small group and they looked at the Bible passage that she'd been studying the night before, you could look at those and say it's a coincidence. And I think for me, I don't, in some ways it doesn't matter whether it is or whether it isn't, in a sense. I think if it brings you closer to God, then I think it's clear that God's at work in it. The more we know about God and his character, I would say the easier it is to distinguish between a coincidence and God at work, and I think we can all kind of point in our lives to moments and times in our life where perhaps in the moment it feels like a coincidence, and perhaps looking back in hindsight, you can say, actually, that was God at work. That's just my 2 cents on that. Do you guys want to share?
I'm happy with that. I agree.
Yeah.
Well, that's rare.
Well, it's rare that I agree with you.
Yeah, well, no, just rare that people don't want to just correct stuff that I've said. But that's okay.
No, that's good. I mean, I think you have to look at the larger picture, don't you? Okay, if one of those stories Holly told, for instance, because I was thinking about that as you were saying too, what would we say to someone who said, oh, it's just a coincidence? Okay, could the worship songs going to the church, could that be a coincidence? Yeah, probably. But when you add the small group reading, when you think how many chapters are in the Bible, there's something like, was it 1,188 or something like that, chapters in the Bible, and then all the verses within that, even more so, and the combination of that with the worship songs. Now we're talking about something with very, very, very low probability mathematically of that happening. Could it still be a coincidence? Yeah, sure. If you want to say it's a coincidence, fine. But as Nick pointed out, God was clearly working in Holly's life to bring her to him. So I think you got to make a choice. Is it a coincidence, or do you want to say it's God? I'd rather give the glory to God myself.
Yeah. Go on, Holly.
When I thought, with the worship music at that church, straight away I did think, oh, this is great, but maybe next week they're going to play all these same songs again. So I went back the next week, and it was different songs. And sometimes they played songs that were on my CD. But sometimes I was thinking, oh, I don't know the words to this song. It's nice, but I'm just sort of trying to get it. But yeah, they didn't play them every week, and so that sort of confirmed to me that he wanted me there.
And if we believe in a God that loves us and is in constant communication with us, then we have to believe that these things happen for a reason, and he cares about the small things in our life as well as the big things. So yeah, okay, I hope that answered your question, whoever that was. And question 2. My main struggle with all of this is God created the earth and then created man, and then Jesus is the creator's son. How can this be? Science says otherwise. Do any of you guys want to have a go at that?
It's a great question. And if I understand you correctly, you're talking about so way back then, God creates the earth, and humanity comes sometime after that. We're not sure. Even if the earth is 4 billion years old, as some believe, humanity comes along much later. How can a man who lived 2,000 years ago be God's son when humanity's already existed for a few thousand years at least, if not longer? I think I'm understanding the question right. Yeah. And if you dig into that a little bit more, I'd encourage you to read John chapter 1, for instance. Just go and find a Bible. John's Gospel, chapter 1 kind of explains some of this in a poetic form. But basically, Jesus was there with God all the time from the beginning. You've probably heard the term the Trinity, or the Holy Trinity. So you have God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit, all there together as one God, existing in 3 parts, if you will. We were talking about really difficult things to understand and try to simplify them. So Jesus, it wasn't that Jesus was a normal bloke who happened to become the Son of God because he was a really good guy. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about how Jesus, who was with God the entire time before the world began, right? Who's with God in the very beginning, before creation, involved in creation, involved in everything, who at the right time, God says, son, it's time for you to go and complete the next part of your mission. And Jesus willingly goes, becomes a human. He hadn't been a human before that. He'd been a spirit, with God, becomes human, lives a human life to show us that it's possible to be friends with God and to have a relationship with him. Dies on the cross, rises again, and then ascends back up to heaven to his rightful place with God. I know I've just given you a really quick, overview of a lot of theology about Jesus there, but I hope that's a little bit helpful. Encourage you maybe to talk to, if you're in a church or in a youth group, talk to your youth worker or vicar about it a bit further. But that's kind of a brief overview of how it happens. Jesus is eternal God, just as God the Father is, but it just so happened that he was born around 2 AD, lived for about 33 years, died, and rose again. Hopefully that helps.
Great. Holly, do you want to add anything into that?
I love the Bible reference that Lloyd gave, and I think that has always really helped me to understand Jesus in creation. And the Trinity is a tough thing to get your head around. I remember having a sermon where somebody had a fidget spinner, which are maybe a bit out of fashion now. They were all the rage, but that when it was spinning, you couldn't really see that there were 3 parts to it. But when it stopped, you can clearly see there's 3 parts. And it's a mystery to get our heads around how God can be 3 parts, and they can be separate, but they are one. But that is part of the greatness and awesomeness of God, that we're not going to be able to get our heads around everything. But that's, I think, what's so amazing about Jesus coming to earth to try and help us get our heads around it a bit by just showing like my friend showed to me, the character of God by becoming a human.
Amazing. And I don't know about you two, but I've certainly been in assemblies in schools where I've been asked to talk about the Trinity, and I've had to somehow commit heresy by whatever I say, because it's probably wrong. But I've used the Jaffa cake analogy, where you've got the chocolate, the orangey bit, and the sponge, and you kind of separate them, but when you put it together, it's one. And you can also look at ice, can't you? Ice and water and steam. And I think it's important to say, Holly, I think both of you touched on it, just saying that this is something that even great scholars can't get their head around, the fact that there is this triune God, this Trinity. So the question's a great one, but there isn't necessarily the simplest of answers, although you've both done a brilliant job at having a go.
No, that's great. Sometimes those analogies can be helpful. They ultimately fall short, as you said, about feeling like you're a heretic. But I'd like to tack back on something that was said in the question. Science says otherwise, and I'm not sure entirely what you meant by that. But I think a lot of times there's this idea that faith and science are in conflict. For myself, I don't find that to be the case at all. I mean, science sometimes tells a story, and Christianity sometimes tells a story, and there might be different ways of looking at that story, but I don't find, for me, scientific discovery does not in any way negatively impact my faith. I love reading, looking at history, looking at science stuff. I'm not a scientist myself, but I'm just curious. I love, watching nature documentaries. If there's a meteor shower, we're out at the park, at 3 a.m. watching the meteors and stuff like that. For me, there's not a major conflict between science and the Bible or science and faith. There is often a conflict in the way that we interpret those things, but there's not actually a conflict in those things themselves. I just want to give you permission to ask the scientific questions, but also ask the religious questions. It's okay. You can do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Quite right. Okay, third question that's come in. Atheists love asking me as a Christian, what about the dinosaurs? Does our American brother maybe have an answer I can give? So Lloyd, Holly, unless you're hiding your accent, well, you're not even a brother, are you? So, and I'm certainly not American. So Lloyd, do you want to share?
Yeah, it kind of hints at a larger question, doesn't it? I mean, I think the real question is, how old is everything? Do you know what I mean? Dinosaurs aren't mentioned clearly in the Bible. There's a couple of texts in Job that some people say could possibly refer to dinosaurs. There's this creature called the Leviathan described there that doesn't fit any creature that we have living now. There's another one called a behemoth, and again, it doesn't really fit anything. I don't want to get really into that because I don't know that those refer to dinosaurs, but they certainly don't refer to anything that exists that we know of right now. So let's just assume for the moment that the Bible doesn't address dinosaurs. I'm kind of like, so what? Is it possible that dinosaurs existed before created humanity? Well, that's what science says. Maybe that's why the Bible doesn't talk about dinosaurs. There is sometimes a belief that when God created the earth, and you read that 7-day creation story, that humanity, is made, and that's it. That's the very beginning, and that those 7 days are to be interpreted literally. That is called a young Earth creationism view. I've got good friends who hold that view. I'm not one of those, as you've probably picked up, from my language already. There's another view called old Earth creationism that believes the biblical account, but that the old Earth kind of already existed before that story starts. I also don't hold that view, but it kind of makes a little bit more sense to me than the young Earth creationism. What I would probably, what you would call a theistic evolutionist, probably. And what that means is I believe God created it all, and maybe he used the tool of evolution to see all the diverse species that we have today. Now, if you believe something different, by all means, believe what you believe, and let's shake hands and respect each other. I don't think you have to hold any one of those specific views to be a good Christian. For me, it makes the best sense of the scientific record and the biblical record. Genesis 1 and 2 is not a scientific text. It was never meant to be. It's more like a poetic love story. It's like God saying, look at all these wonderful things I made for you to enjoy, and let me tell you about it in this poetic way. Or you could look at it as the early humans, the early people of faith, trying to understand the created world around them, and knowing that everything came from God, and that having that deeply held belief that God was over all, they sort of interpreted this story in this way and said it in a poetic way to represent days. You know, I personally don't believe that's literal, but if you do, that's okay. And I don't have a problem with that. So dinosaurs for me have no bearing on my faith whatsoever. I hope there's dinosaurs in heaven, because I'd like to ride one. I think that would be amazing.
Yeah, I like that. And I think it's one of the things that I've learned in my adult years, and I wish I'd learned it when I was a teenager, is the lens through which you read each book of the Bible. And I think that if you look at, some of the books of the Bible are poetry, some are retelling stories. You've got Revelation, which is I forget the word now, apocalyptic.
Yeah, absolutely.
You've got letters. You've got loads of different styles, and I think that someone told me only a few years ago, Genesis is at least the first couple of chapters is very poetic.
Yeah,
and things
absolutely.
may not have been as literal as we imagined. So even my daughter was asking me the other day, Dad, are we all related from Adam and Eve? And I was like, well, yeah, if what it says in the Bible in Genesis 1 and 2 is factually correct, then yes, but it may not be. And so, that's just something that I guess our hope and our prayer is that these questions are explored, but don't sway or don't hold tight onto the answers, because there's so much more to God that is stunning and amazing. So hopefully that kind of addresses that point.
There's some great books out there that address this stuff. They're a bit heavy, if you really want to go into the scientific side. There's an author called John Lennox who addresses some of this stuff. 7 Days That Divide the World is one where he examines different views about the creation story. Another one that I've read recently is by Peter Enns, E-N-N-S. And I've just forgotten the name of the book, but if you look at Peter Enns, you'll see one about his story. Oh, the evolution of Adam. And his book is actually more about, if you're a Christian who believes in evolution, how are we to understand the significance of Adam and Eve and who they were? And that one was really helpful too. Again, it's pretty intense. It's fairly academic, but if you're a scientific minded person and enjoy that kind of thing, I'd recommend checking a couple of those books out. And again, just show people respect. If they have a different view from you, that's okay. It's not a problem. But don't let somebody kind of bully you and say, oh, well, dinosaurs means there's no God. Well, that's nonsense. Not at all.
Yeah.
For me, I think sometimes those bigger questions are a barrier to people, and they're just a bit fearful to commit to, yes, I'm going to believe in God, because they can't answer everything. But if God is who he is, how could we possibly answer everything? That's kind of big-headed of us to say, oh, I can understand everything. And God is so much bigger than that, and we shouldn't let things like that get in the way of us enjoying getting to know our Creator.
That's great. I know we've pushed for time, but can we do the one about prayer? Could we possibly answer that one? Because that one came in a couple of days ago. Do you remember? I've got it here if you don't have it.
Oh, yeah, go on. Yeah, you read it out then.
Okay, so I'll read the question, and if somebody else wants to answer it, go for it. If I pray for something that I want or need, should I keep praying about it until I get an answer? Or if I've prayed about it once, does God not want to hear about it again? That's a really good question, I think. I'll let one of you take that one.
Yeah, I love that question. It's something that I've explored in small groups. And for me, God is either going to answer that that prayer in some way, either by directly, like what you've asked for, or He's going to change your heart about what you're asking for. So for me, I would say keep praying about it until something happens. Some prayer always changes something. So either He's going to change your heart, or He's going to answer your prayer. Sometimes that answer is not yet, later. And so if you feel that that's maybe what He's saying, then it might be something that you have to keep on praying for. There'll be some things we'll pray for our whole lives. But he asks us to keep knocking, to keep asking. So He never gets tired of listening to our prayers.
Yeah, brilliant.
Yeah, it's good. And I would just, before Lloyd gives us his answer, I would just say that, you know, my understanding of God is that He just loves to talk with us. And the way to build a relationship with anyone is to have conversation with them. You know, I only know certain things about people because I've bothered to ask questions about their lives. And so when I'm praying, and I'm still learning how to do this well, but my prayers consist of me talking to God and asking Him questions. And then it's spending time listening to what He says back to me. And I would suggest that whether you're getting an immediate download of an answer straight away or not, the more time you spend with God, the more you're going to understand Him, the more you're going to hear His voice, know what His voice sounds like, the more you'll know about who you are because of what He says about you. And that might help shape your prayer life going forward. And, you know, I hope that your prayer gets answered at some point.
Yeah, fantastic. Nothing to add. Great answers, guys. Thanks for that.
Great. Well, look, guys, brilliant. We're just out of time. So I'm just going to finish by letting people know what is coming up. So at 1 o'clock, we have the Instagram challenge. I don't have a note of who is running that, but check that out. That will be on Instagram Live, and it's also on YouTube as well. That's at 1 o'clock. And then at 2 o'clock, there is a seminar entitled How to Connect with God by Mark and Lisa. So please, stick around, check those out. Thank you to my co-contributors. Brilliant to hear from both of you. And hopefully we've answered those questions that have come in. Before I go, just answer the facts. We had a couple of people guess on YouTube, and I think it was quite unanimous that Lloyd used to be in a in a punk band, which is great. So well done.
It is true.
It is true. It is true. And if you're wondering who the judo master is, it is not me. It was Holly. Oh, she's
yes.
I can't remember. Anyway, and it was me having the Princess of Romania stay at my house. My dad used to do some work for the Romanian royal family, and so there we go.
Amazing.
So guys, it's been awesome. Thank you to Ben behind the scenes making this happen. Stick around for more amazing stuff at 1 and 2 o'clock. But from us, it's goodbye.
Bye.
God
See
bless.
you soon, guys.
Bye.
Love you, Maycap.
Bye.
Bye.